Good morning. After eloquent speech of Professor Dr. Tripathi and man's lived experience in Indonesia, I'll be shifting to one of the most important aspects. I'll be talking about two things, a different model that we need and a different gauge that we require. The model, as you could see, is a fractal model, which is not a linear Euclidean geometry. It's a fractal model where there is no center, where there is no point from which things diffused. I'll give one example or two examples before I start talking about changing gauge. Fractal geometry, as I told you, has no important center. Unlike the diffusionist model, which talks about a linear flow of culture from India to Southeast Asia, I'll give two examples of fractal geometry that operated in Indian Ocean and beyond it. One is, and it has come up very recently, Sri Gyana, a Buddhist monk from Bengal, persecuted in early 13th century, went to Nepal, and then he went to Tibet. He had a follower, and this follower became the disciple of Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan performed a Kalachakra ritual in 1250s, 70s, 60s most likely, and that follower of Sri Gyana became the master of Kalachakra ritual before Kublai Khan embarked upon a world conquest, which include conquest of Champa, that is Vietnam, as well as conquest of Java. That's one example. The other example I could cite is Dharmakirti, who was a famous Buddhist monk in Malaysia. Atisha, the man who took Buddhism to Tibet, went to Malaysia, studied under Dharmakirti for 10 years, and then went back to India and then went to Tibet. That's how the fractal geometry worked in Indian Ocean. It went beyond the aquaspace of Bay of Bengal to include Tibetan plateau. And you know, Nepal as well as Tibet was an important component. The second is about shifting the gauge. Let us, we must excavate Odishan archaeological sites that would give an important indicator about our connections with the greater Indian Ocean, including, for example, Ian Glover's work on turquoise glazed ware, which have been found from Kalakatapatna, Manikpatna, and Sar will be talking about that. But I am, pleading for shifting the gaze to Indonesian source, to Cambodian source, and I'll be speaking of two aspects. One is the textile boom in Indian Ocean water between 8th century, let's say 9th century, 13th century, and what are the sources that speak of Kalinga. And the second aspect I'll be talking about culture, if time permits, which is about the introductions and consecration of a Matruka image by an East Javanese ruler, Kritanagara, in 1292, before he was assassinated or before he was to face Kublai Khan's attack. So that's the context in which I'll be speaking of. And there is a textile boom between 10th to 13th century, and that textile boom occurred in view of a sartorial shift in Indonesia. Indonesia shifted from birch bark cloth to ikat traditions. So we have plenty of evidence, both from Ashmolean Museum as well as literary evidence, as well as epigraphic evidence, which I'll show from Indonesian epigraphy, about a sartorial shift that occurred between 10th century when birch bark gave way to ikat tradition, which we call as bandha textiles or tie and dye traditions of Odisha, which has spread across in different parts of Odisha. And I have used Wisman Christie's registers of Indonesian inscriptions, and you'll see that, and then juxtaposed with various statuaries, stone statuaries, as well as bronze statuaries from Central Java, Eastern Java, largely from Kritanagara period, again, or later on Majapahit period, or for example, the bronzes that we have in Central Archaeological Museum at Yogyakarta. So these are the patterns. If you look at the patterns, these are the patterns that we find for the first time in the ikat traditions that was transported to India, from India to Indonesia. We have a circle where we have the floral designs. We have a central circle with 6 lotuses on the on the outer circle that we find in Pasapali traditions of Odisha. I'll show you some of these patterns. These are taken from Pullen's book, Splendor Patterns, and you'll see that some of these patterns are very closely similar to the Bandha textiles of Odisha, be it Sambalpur, be it Nuapatna or elsewhere. So this is from Pragya Paramita, famous Pragya Paramita images and the pattern that you have. The only problem that we have is that in Odishan statuaries, be it bronze or be it stone statuaries, we have the Sati traditions, which is mere a sari being wrapped up on the body, and therefore hardly we get any Ikka traditions or the Bandha textile being represented on the statuaries of early medieval temples, which is not the case in Indonesia, which is rich in these Ikka pattern designs that we find in the statuaries. This is one area where we need to work on and find out whether we have the Ikka traditions or the Bandha tradition being represented in Odisha's statuaries. This is again the floral designs that we find. This is a typical Odishan year where we have the lotus and the stem of the lotus going through the entire, like we find right from the Sanchi Stupa, where from the balustrade onwards the stem of the lotus engulfs the entire architecture. Similarly, we find this pattern also, which you find elsewhere in Odisha, at least the door jamb from where we have the Purnaghata and the foliage coming out to the temples. So this is a comparison between double ikat from Bali on the left and our Pasapali tradition where you have the dots. So there are, as I told you, this is the context. There is a sartorial shift, and that sartorial shift is largely because of the introduction of Ikka tradition to Indonesia, and we find in inscriptions that these imported cloths, imported, as I told you, Bandha textiles became part of the royal policies, and therefore we have many Sima charters. These are Sima charters, are land grants which are given by the king on a special occasions to various officials, and these Sima charters give reference to various types of cloths which are given to the officials as part of the royal ritual policy of legitimations of his rules. And as I told you, there are about 50 types of cloths. I don't have one, and then another cloth which is said that this is from Kalinga, out of these 50. Therefore, there are specific cloths which are manufactured in Kalinga from Kling Putta. That's called Kling Putta. That's the cloth which are imported from Kalinga. So therefore, these Sima charters gives about 50 kinds of cloths which are mostly imported cloths and ikat variety, and which are part of the royal policies. And this is one of the statuaries where you could look at. It is a Vishwabajra as a form of Uttariya which are wrapped on the body, and you find also on Ratnagiri Bhotif Stupa, Vishwabajra being used as a motif. So these are therefore the motifs which you find, and the context, who are doing this trade, who brought in this imported textiles. And we have 13 inscriptions from Central Java to East Java from 9th century, 13th century, which talks about the presence of South Asian foreign merchants. They are all tax-paying foreign merchants which are on the shores of East Javanese waters. And if you look at, I'll just go through the 9 inscriptions or few of them, and I'll show that even though the name of other regions of South Asia, for example, Dramila or Tamil became Cholika at certain period. China, as ma'am was saying, Chinese junk began to appear beyond the South China Sea, entered into the Indian Oceans from Song period onwards. The Dhao became a major player, the Arabic Dhao became a major player from 7th century AD onwards. We don't have those kind of shipwrecks which talk about or associate Dhao or Chinese junk with, we don't have Odishan kind of ships, but we have inscriptional evidence which suggests that Kalinga is one of the many South Asians or other tax-paying foreigners, along with, for example, Lata, Karnataka, Ayavole, Sinna, Dravida, The only name that remains constant between 9th century, 13th century in these 9 inscriptions is Kalinga. I'll just take through few of these inscriptions. Kalirungam inscriptions, for example, talks about tax-paying Waragakilalan or tax farmer group on the East Javanese water, which include South Asians or Southeast Asian Champa, Remanna, that is Ramanna Desh, Mon, that is Lower Burma, Khimera, Cambodia, while the listed South Asian came from Kling, Pandarika, that is Karnataka, on the coast, then Aryaputra or Ayabhole, and then you have Sinhala. For example, the second inscription is Palebuhan Charter of 927, which concerns a community on the bank of Solo River near Madiun, which is unfortunately partially legible. The name of Singhala, Pandarika, Ramanna, however, is legible. The Kane inscription 10 and 21, for the first time brings in Dravida along with the other names. Khimera, Remanna, Champa, Pandarika, Singhala, but Kling is constant. The inscription of Patakan, for example, brings in Cholas for the first time. Therefore, instead of Dravida, now Chola became active during the period of Rajendra, Rajaraja, and we know that Manigrama, Mira Abraham's excellent book talks about or documents the presence of Manigrama as far as China. Then we have Turung Hang, Garaman inscriptions. I should not go and waste my time because time is short. And therefore, we have these up to 1305. The presence of Kalinga is constant, even though the name of other South Asian or Southeast Asian merchants kept changing. So therefore, this is the context of, this is one context of the presence of, and this is solid evidence. The only thing that we need to do is to find out Ikat tradition or Bandha tradition on our statuary, and then, the narrative of connections between Southeast Asia or Java and Odisha so far as textile trade and Odisha's participation in early medieval textile boom is complete. The second aspect I'll talk about the culture. This is a 1292 image, and there is an inscription on the back. This is a Chamunda inscription. Just before the assassination, there are many internecine conflict in East Java. There was constant threat to Ketanagara, the ruler, and he was about to face, because Kublai Khan sent an ambassador saying that unless you submit, I am sending my naval expedition. And this man, just facing international conflict and possible invasion from Kublai Khan, consecrated a Chamunda image. Why I am taking this will be quite clear. When I go through other inscriptions or statuaries of his time, especially from Chandi Jago, which is a funerary temple of his father, built by Kretanagara in 1270. And if you look at these inscriptions, why am I taking this? Because Chamunda, even though Bhairava image is quite popular, Bhairava has been used by Kretanagara and exported this to Malaysia or Malaya, but you won't find Chamunda image in Southeast Asia. You will get Durga images, you will get Bhairava images, but not Bhairavi images. And Chamunda, you might be knowing, right from 8th century AD onwards, from Bhaumakara periods onwards, has been used in Odisha in a particular kind of rituals called Kola rituals along with Bhairava, where Chamunda has been worshipped to get victory in the war. And therefore, this is the possible context in which Chamunda worship was introduced by Kretanagara for possible victory over Kublai Khan and others. If you look at this, why am I saying and possible Odishan connection? This is in Sanskrit. I'll show you another inscriptions, and these are the Ashta Kola rituals that we find from Barahi temples, which he could have adapted, Basikarana, Sammohana and others. I am not going into it. Or the text, for example, I have used Nagara Ketagama for analyzing Kretanagara's political activities, but I am not going into the possible context in which Chamunda worship was introduced by Kretanagara. Just to reinforce my point that Chamunda worship could have been imported from Odisha, I'll show you Chandijago's image inscription. These are the image inscriptions that we find from Chandijago, and this is 1280. And if you find this is in chaste Sanskrit, therefore long after so-called the emergence of vernaculars, Sanskrit, our cosmopolitan language, was circulating in Southeast Asia. This is Varali, Pandara Vasini, Bharali, Lochana, and this is in chaste Sanskrit, and we have made paleographical analysis, Gina Kim also suggests so. If you look at the paleographic characters of these chaste Sanskrit, this is very close to Kendupatna copper plate of Narasimha Deva too, suggesting that, there are other opinions. People say that it is also closer to Gujarat Sanskrit inscriptions of 12th century AD of Anila Pataka. But, it's very, if you look at Varali, Va, Ra, they are very close to Kendupatna copper plate, suggesting possible again link between India and Odisha and Java. I told you the economic context, I told you the possible Buddhist context or Chamunda context, and these contexts could be further elaborated in other forums and in other academic deliberations. Thank you so much.